The air inside the mirrored maze was suffocating, thick with tension and fear. Mira leaned against the cold glass wall, her pulse racing as the whispered warning echoed in her mind. Don't trust the mirrors. Her reflection stared back, unnervingly out of sync, its wicked grin daunting her. Somewhere nearby, a contestant screamed, their voice suddenly cut off. Mira bit her lip, trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't afford to panic, not when Arian's future depended on her survival. But with every second that passed, the maze seemed to shift, twisting corridors into dead ends and making it harder to tell where she had been. A faint sound behind her made her freeze. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, and closing in. She turned, but the hallway was empty. Only her distorted reflection stared back, its expression growing darker. Then it spoke. You'll never leave here alive, Mira. Mira stumbled backward, her heart pounding. Reflections couldn't talk. This was impossible. But before she could process what had just happened, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the maze. Suddenly, a blood-chilling laugh echoed through the corridors, sending a wave of terror through her. She turned a corner and nearly collided with another contestant, a man in his 40s, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Did you see them?" he whispered, clutching her arm with trembling hands. "See who?" Mira asked, her voice shaking. "The reflections," he hissed. "They're hunting us." Before Mira could respond, a loud crash came from behind them. They both turned to see shards of glass littering the floor, and in the broken mirror stood nothing. No reflection. The man stumbled back in terror. "I'm not staying here!" he yelled and bolted down another corridor. Mira tried to follow, but she heard him scream moments later. Turning the corner, she froze. The man lay motionless on the floor, his reflection standing over him, holding a jagged shard of glass. It looked at Mira and smiled. Mira ran blindly, her chest heaving as she fought to suppress the sobs threatening to escape her throat. She had never felt so helpless, so trapped. The maze was alive, and it wanted her dead. She stopped when she saw a familiar figure in the distance, Nina. Relief washed over her as she ran toward her old friend. "Nina, thank God But as she drew closer, Mira realized something was wrong. Nina's expression was blank, her movements robotic. And then Mira saw the reflection behind her. It wasn't Nina's reflection at all. It was something else entirely. A grotesque version of her friend with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. "Mira." Nina's voice was a hollow echo. "I told you not to trust anyone." Before Mira could respond, the mirrored Nina lunged at her, dragging her into another corridor. Mira screamed, fighting back with every ounce of strength she had. Tears blurred her vision as she broke free, running until she collapsed in exhaustion. When Mira opened her eyes, she found herself in a small room with a single mirror on the wall. Her own reflection stared back at her, but this time, it didn't mimic her movements. Instead, it spoke. "Welcome to the truth, Mira," it said, its voice calm and chilling. "You were never meant to survive this." "What are you talking about?" Mira demanded, her fists clenched. "This game isn't about money," the reflection continued. "It's about control. You think you're here by accident? Number you were chosen because you're desperate, because you'll do anything to win. They're watching you, testing you, and when you fail, they'll replace you." "Replace me?" Mira whispered, horrified. The reflection smiled. "Think about it. Why do you think the mirrors don't match? Because they're alive, and when you die, they'll take your place in the real world." Mira stumbled back, her mind reeling. If what it said was true, then this wasn't just a game. It was a trap. The sound of grinding gears snapped Mira out of her thoughts. The mirror slid aside, revealing a dark passageway. A voice echoed from the corridor, soft and familiar. "Mira, come find me." It was Arian's voice. "No!" Mira shouted, shaking her head. "You're lying!" But the voice called out again, weaker this time. Her maternal instincts kicked in, and she stepped into the passageway, the mirror sliding shut behind her. The corridor was pitch black, the air heavy with an unnatural chill. As she walked, she heard faint whispers, growing louder with each step. They spoke her name, but in different voices, some pleading, others mocking. At the end of the hallway was a single door, its surface carved with intricate patterns. Mira hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. She knew whatever was behind that door would change everything. With a deep breath, she pushed it open. Mira pushed open the intricately carved door, her heart racing as Arian's voice echoed faintly from beyond. "Mama, help me." The sound pierced her soul, the desperation unmistakable. Inside, she found herself in an impossibly vast chamber, dimly lit by a flickering chandelier. Shadows danced across the walls, and the room seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. "Arian!" she called out, her voice breaking. But the echoes distorted her words, twisting them into cruel laughter. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled forward. How could her son be here? He was supposed to be safe at home. Suddenly she saw him. A small figure huddled in the corner, his face hidden behind his knees. Mira's breath hitched as she ran toward him, her footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. "Arian, it's me!" But as she reached out to touch him, the figure lifted its head. It wasn't Arian. Its face was a grotesque imitation, hollow eyes staring back at her with an unnatural smile. "Mama," it whispered in a chilling, distorted voice before dissolving into smoke. Mira stumbled backward, her chest heaving as the smoke swirled around her, forming shadowy figures that seemed to whisper her darkest fears. One of them spoke in her own voice. "You're a failure, Mira. You'll never save him." "Stop!" she screamed, covering her ears. But the whispers grew louder, merging into a deafening roar. The chandelier above flickered violently, casting flashes of light across the chamber. In one of those flashes, Mira saw them, the masked figures who had orchestrated the game. They stood in a circle, motionless, watching her from the edges of the room. Their masks were different this time, grotesque and deformed, like twisted reflections of her own face. "What do you want from me?" she cried, her voice echoing. One of the figures stepped forward, holding a silver key. It spoke in a monotone voice, devoid of emotion. "The key is yours, but to take it, you must sacrifice someone." Mira froze, her mind racing. "Sacrifice? I don't understand." The figure turned, gesturing to a figure behind her. Mira turned slowly and gasped. It was Naina, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. "No," Mira whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't real. You're lying." "It's very real," the masked figure replied. "Take the key and you will advance. Refuse, and you both die here." Naina struggled against her restraints, her muffled cries bleeding with Mira. Mira's heart shattered. How could she choose between her survival and her best friend's life? "Naina, I'm so sorry," Mira sobbed, dropping to her knees. Memories of their childhood together flashed before her eyes, their shared laughter, their dreams of a better future. And now, here they were, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. "I can't do this," Mira said, tears streaming down her face. "Time is running out," the figure said coldly. Naina's eyes locked onto Mira's, and for a moment, they seemed to soften. She nodded, as if giving Mira permission. But Mira couldn't bring herself to move. She screamed in anguish, the weight of the decision tearing her apart. Before Mira could make her choice, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The masked figures vanished into the shadows, leaving only their haunting laughter behind. The silver key floated in midair, glowing ominously. A voice boomed from nowhere, different from the others, deep, resonant, and almost godlike. "You have hesitated, Mira. Now, you will face the truth." The room twisted violently, the walls collapsing into a swirling vortex of darkness. Mira was thrown into the void, her screams swallowed by the chaos. When she awoke, she was no longer in the chamber. She was in her old apartment, but something was wrong. The walls were cracked and bleeding, and the furniture was warped into grotesque shapes. Arian's laughter echoed from the hallway, but it wasn't the sweet sound she remembered. It was hollow, almost mechanical. She followed the sound, her steps hesitant. At the end of the hallway, she found a mirror. Inside it, she saw herself, but not quite. Her reflection wore a sinister smile, its eyes glowing red. "You've been here before, Mira," the reflection said, "and you failed every time." "What are you talking about?" Mira demanded, her voice shaking. "This isn't your first game," it replied. "You're part of the experiment, and every time you die, we reset you." Mira's blood ran cold. Could it be true? Was she trapped in an endless cycle of torment, doomed to relive this nightmare forever? The reflection leaned closer, its smile widening. "But this time is different. This time, you're starting to remember." Mira backed away, her mind racing. If this was true, then there had to be a way to break the cycle. She glanced around the warped apartment, searching for clues. That's when she saw it, a photograph of her and Aryan on the coffee table. But the faces in the photo were wrong. They weren't smiling. They were screaming. Beneath the photo was a handwritten note. "Find the door of beginnings." The reflection's laughter filled the room as Mira grabbed the note, her determination growing. She didn't know what the door of beginnings was, but she had to find it. For Aryan, for herself. As the walls of the apartment began to close in, Mira ran toward the only door left standing, her resolve unshaken. The game is far from over, and the stakes are only getting higher. What lies ahead for our players? Will they uncover the truth, or will the next challenge take them one step closer to the end? Stay tuned for the next episode of The Final Invitation. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Your invitation to the mystery continues.